Welcome everyone to my final and last class. Over the past few classes, I have combined everyone's feedback, listened to you folks, and hopefully you will see it in the last class and you will see it in this class of how we kind of transformed the feedback I got from the first class to try and kind of compromise the information into a nice solid block, so you'll feel like instead of trying to space that out because of how this class could be taught, kind of make it a bit shorter, just so you'll take you'll go in the class, do the Zoom call, you have a chat with everyone, you feel like you've come in and you've left learning something. So tonight's class will start off with duty to all. So if we go on to the next slide. Duty to all. So a Jedi's mission is to support their community through service. A Jedi is charged with acting objectively when they recognize a situation where someone needs help. Jedi put their lives above the lives of others, even when facing danger, but they know that they can help through direct action or indirect action as per the situation. So one of the wisest things I learned while going through my training as a Jedi was that even though this is what is written quite clearly in the values of the Jedi Compass, when we actually look through it and actually begin to break it down into context, not every situation means you jump in. I was taught, even though I had a very good skill set, there are some things that I should never jump straight into because A, I am not trained for that situation. B, I do not fully understand what's going on in that situation. And C, I should not put myself in complete risk for the greater good. That was taught to me by a very wise mentor. And it's really interesting because we speak about duty to all quite often, especially in the Jedi community, about how we should help other people. But to truly help someone, it's not all about being a hero or jumping straight in. Sometimes it's about that afterthought of just being nice to someone or even walking up to someone and giving them support afterwards. And sometimes it is about jumping in, but it's about knowing your knowledge, knowing your limits, knowing when you should step in and knowing when you are not ready to step in or not trained or it's not your specialty, but getting someone else who can help in that situation. Now, obviously, this class is directed around the LGBT community. So if we look at the next slide, I'm going to talk about some ways that you can be helpful towards the community, and being helpful and towards the community is part of being more accepting towards them. So the first one I want to call out is calling out people when they use bigoted or hateful language. Now, it's not always easy to know what is bigoted or hateful, because a lot of people may claim, oh, well, you're just being PC or you're just being insensitive. But the realisticness is that if you look online and if you watch videos and you've talked to your LGBT friends, you'll get a good understanding of what is actually quite bigoted language and things like slurs, things like inappropriate jokes, or even just comments that you'll soon understand that's not actually acceptable. And so if you hear a friend or a colleague kind of say that out loud, well, you go, well, hold on a second, you can't say that. As they try to argue back anyway to you, you can always discuss with them or go, well, no, you can't say that. That's actually really bigoted, or, well, that's really insensitive. And someone goes, well, oh, I don't care about that. Well, then what you should ideally do in that situation is then take it to a higher up. Now, it seems petty, or even, it may seem petty, going to a SMAJ or a supervisor, but at the end of the day, if someone brings hateful language into your kind of surrounding, then they could be saying that to someone, and that almost oppression can make them feel really down. And at the end of the day, that could be a massive difference to their life. That could really make them feel not accepted, and that's a really hurtful thing. So if you stand up for them, you could be making a massive difference. Again, with the second point, you do your research. There's so much media out there today that at the end of the day, you should be able to do your own research, kind of understand what is acceptable or what's not acceptable, especially in terms of the LGBT community. It's not, as hard as it may sound slightly harsh, it's not hard to go do some research. Go on YouTube, go on Facebook, go on Google, even go listen to someone speak about this kind of stuff. A lot of people will tell you what is helpful to the community or what is not helpful. Again, look at policies, policies about gay marriage, adoption, stuff like that. And while I don't want to rail into politics because I'll be here all night, we as individuals play a part in the society that we live in. And if we choose to ignore it, then a lot of negative stuff will come out of that. And as Jedi, even this is the hardest thing for me to admit, we have a role to play in the society to make it a better life for everyone, to make it a more positive, to create a more positive atmosphere for those around us. We have a duty to step in where we can. Be knowledgeable and not ignorant of your surroundings. And that comes down to things like your pronouns, your sexualities, people's lifestyles. Educate yourself. And it's just small education. And even if you mess up, if you are genuinely sincere about it, it's a likely chance the person who is that way inclined will be quite accepting of it. So don't worry or trip yourself up. I work with people who, I remember when I first started my new job as a bartender down in Wales, I started at Cozy Club maybe 3 weeks ago. And even then, I had managers come up to me going, "Oh yeah, I'm really sorry. I never worked with someone who's non-binary." And they were like, "Oh, if I get my pronouns wrong, I'm so sorry. Just let me know. I'll happily be corrected. I'll be educated and corrected." And so on. So at the end of the day, it's all about just education. And it's not, I'm not saying you should be sorry every occasion, but if you have almost that attitude of, you're trying your best, I'll accept it. And most people will, just be sincere, be honest, be kind, and be understanding. That is the biggest part I can say. And again, that comes to my last point, be accepting of other people, because people go through difficult lives. At the end of the day, it's just not funny. We all have very difficult, very long, very tasking lives, but we can still make a difference by being kind to each other, by being nice and be respecting and trying our best. And that is all anyone can ask of us. Also, if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about what's not helpful. So what is not helpful is again bringing up stereotypes, maybe asking appropriate questions. Now, the ones I think of on the top of my head is obviously asking very gender stereotype questions like who asked. So if you go to a man and man in a gay relationship, ask who wears the trousers. That's not really helpful. Again, making jokes about having a gay best friend. These are people's lives. And while some people may make their personality around their sexuality, overall in the community, that should not be the thing. Personality should not be around their sexuality or their, identity, or like their gender or their identity, or their sexuality. It should be around who they are. Again, assuming things or thinking that you're going to offend someone immediately if you get something wrong. Most people are quite understanding. And at the end of the day, what's also not helpful is almost allowing comments to be made, especially when you could see it is upsetting to certain colleagues or friends or family. And while it may be hard to stand up for these things, we still have a choice to make. And I'm not saying you should go up into every situation. If some stranger starts being mean to some guy on the street, I'm not saying jump in immediately. But if you feel like you have the opportunity to intervene and you have the skill set to, then go for it. If you feel like you're confident to stop what is not helpful and what is almost damaging to another individual, then step in. But again, I urge you to consider that you have the right skill set, you're trained, and you know what to do. Because it is dangerous. We live in a dangerous world. But, we can, but with the right skills, right minds, right attitudes, then we can make a difference to all. Again, I'm not going to go too much about what's not helpful because every person is different in the LGBT community. And again, it's something I urge you to do more research on its own, because this class isn't supposed to be almost the ultimate guide. It's supposed to be a stepping stone, because that's all knowledge is. It's a stepping. That's all these again. This all this class was supposed to be, is a stepping stone to encourage you to do more research into the LGBT community and just explore that creative openness that a lot of Jedi get, because we are knowledgeable beings and we love learning, we love understanding and being kind and positive. So, hopefully you get a better understanding of what you should be doing. And that is, at the end of the day, it's just trying to be understanding. And once you, even if you understand the basics of pride, that's still a massive difference compared to a large population of the world. I mean, the amount of people I have to explain pansexuality to on a regular basis is quite shocking, even though in my eyes, I live in Cardiff now, and it's still quite a normal accepted thing in this city. But if I go out of the city and go to like Scotland or England, I'm still explaining it quite heavily to people. And even then, pansexuality at the end of the day is just kind of that you feel more connected to an emotional and personality kind of bond rather than physical attraction. So again, it's just small understandings like that. While people are probably quite happy to explain, it is tiresome. And what's not helpful is having to explain yourself 10 times a day over the smallest things. that is probably quite a normal thing in society, because I mean, gay people have been around for a long time. Whether that's not been accepted in society for the past 20 years, there has been a massive gay community. I mean, even if I look back to the Stonewall riots, again, that was happening for a long time. So it's not really something new. It's just more, I feel like the generations now, because of social media, we're connecting with each other. So we feel like we connect with people who are kind of have a similarity towards us. And that's what makes us be loud about ourselves, be proud of our personalities, our bodies, our looks, our lifestyles, because we're connecting with more people. As a Jedi, we kind of have to be almost the neutral person in that kind of situation. We have to go into that situation with an open mind, positive attitude, and just generally kind of looking into, a willingness to learn about other things and be learning to accept people for who they are. Next slide. So before we go to the next slide, we're just going to have a little talk. Just any questions, anything you want me to answer, or if you'd like me to clarify or explain better. Yes. So has anyone got any questions?
Okay, so have you ever watched Bleach, the anime? No.
No, I'm not watching anime.
Okay. There's a scene in there where it's a callback to something that happened in Rukia's past. And she's told that there is a difference in letting someone fight for their pride and then just leaving them out to dry. So in terms of when we looked at duty to all, when you should and shouldn't act, and that goes back to action, which is also in the Jedi Compass, is knowing when you should and shouldn't act. You had mentioned throughout this whole thing that, we sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, sometimes you go up afterwards. At what point would you say that it's probably a better idea for someone who's really not in the know, like a cisgender ally, who wants to help, but isn't really sure, like they go in, they want to say something to defend that person, but I guess the question I'm trying to get to is, at what point are we walking as an ally on the pride of somebody else who's defending themselves? How would you be able to tell?
Okay, so I would probably put this down to, it's a hard one because it depends on the scenario. If someone looks like they're struggling to defend themselves, or even if they're doing fine, again, reassurance. So just be like, I've got that person's back. I'm not gay, but I support them. That sounds really cheesy, but at the end of the day, I think it very much depends on your scenario. If you, so like, let's say you're in work, and you're straight. You've always been straight, and then you get a new colleague comes in, and he's a gay colleague. He's very flamboyant, and one of the other colleagues starts making comments towards him, and you can tell they're being a bit cheeky towards each other. But then you can sense that. You could sense when the other colleague, let's say colleague A is flamboyant, colleague B is not flamboyant. So I'd say colleague A is getting in, colleague B B is not. So let's say colleague B starts making some comments that sounds wrong, but you're not sure. Now, the best thing to do is kind of observe the situation. And then kind of once that ends, you go up to colleague A and go, are you okay? That seemed a bit harsh, is everything all right? And if they start speaking to you and explain what's happened, that's great. But again, it's very much more, I think we live in a society where you kind of understand. I think if you can understand body language, which is a very hard skill, but if you start understanding body language, and when people are go from jokey to just being rude, even then, I've told a colleague, no, you can't say that. Again, I say colleagues because that is the likeliness. You're not likely to stop a stranger in the street and say, oh, you can't say that, which does happen occasionally, but at the end of the day, you're more likely to find these issues among your friends or your colleagues. I think as a straight person, you are more than welcome to step in or back someone up, but it's just knowing kind of how the best route to go about it. It's just, even if it's just like, be like, I was waiting for that moment to be like, yeah, I support this person and what they're saying. That's probably the best way to go about it.
Kind of read the Force there.
Yeah, almost read the Force, gut feeling, read the Force. I'd be like, as soon as that moment goes, just look at them and give them that look. And as a Jedi, when the Force connects with you, and you're like, I understand, or I feel this way too, but you don't say it, because that is one thing I do really like about the Force, is you can feel this energy around you, and you can feel it connecting. And that moment when you look at a colleague or someone and you can feel that bond through the Force, and you're like, and you walk up to them and you're like, I've got you, like, we got this. And it's just that support. At the end of the day, even if it is just calling out someone and going, don't say that. Again, it's hard to know when, and maybe we can't be a bit jumping too quickly, but it's just understanding when it goes from comedy to actual kind of hateful behavior, or even ignorant behavior. But as someone who is part of the LGBT community, knowing you have the support of your colleagues, or just even acceptance of just being kind to them, or even just accepting that, even listening to I've got a couple of colleagues who are gay or part of the LGBT community. I even just listen to them talk about their lives and just treating them like normal people. Someone may talk about that and their boyfriend's going out, like, yeah, it's cool. Even stuff like that makes a big difference. But at the end of the day, trust in the Force. Trust your gut feeling. If you feel like you should step in, step in. If you feel like, because that is the biggest thing, is you will feel it and you will get that sensation flowing through you. While it may sound a bit cliche, that's the realistic nature of a Jedi. We're part of the Force and we can feel it. It flows to us every single second. So when we get that connection to someone else, you will understand when it's the time to step in. And even if you mess up, as long as you're supportive of, I think if you're a straight person and you go to Pride and then complain about Pride, you're missing the point, and you're very much not understanding what the point of Pride is. But if you're supportive of the LGBT community all year round, then you are very much an ally. I hope that answers your question.
Anyone else? Oh.
So this is the this is the end of my classes. So this is one of my first class, and it's been really interesting. I've learned a lot about what I could be doing, what I can improve on, and what I've done well so far. Now, obviously, because of the way some of these classes timings have worked out, like everyone's been able to join us on time, but I'd really be interested in hearing what everyone has learned so far through these couple of classes. Would you like to go first, Ali?
It's been reinforced for me.
Yeah.
Things have been reinforced for me. Let's get Keith to comment.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the key thing I would take away is try not to be so self-conscious about being an ally and just try and do your best, because no matter what you do, it's possible to go wrong, and I think we can all make mistakes. And at the end of the day, people in the LGBT community are just human beings like the rest of us, and getting something wrong in that context is not magically worse than getting it wrong in other contexts. As long as you're not going out of your way, there's a big difference between being ignorant and actually accidentally doing the wrong thing, but owning up to that mistake and apologizing then, and that's the key thing. I think I would say, as I learned it, is being a good ally is when you do make an honest mistake, is don't be embarrassed about it, apologize for it and learn from it. But also that it's very important that if you want to be an ally to a cause, any cause, is that you have to put the work in. You can't expect people to do the work for you. As I said, yeah, but I'd have to give Ali a lot of stuff has been reinforced, but I think for me that those are the two key takeaways, which is just you just gotta get on with it. You can't be afraid to just try and do your best. Because if you hide away from potentially making mistakes to help improve situations, you're hiding away from doing the right thing as well. And also that people can surprisingly, and again, just I think it's useful reminder is that do keep in mind that not everyone will know what you know or have knowledge that you start taking for granted, such as terms such as pansexual. Not everyone will be familiar with that term, or stuff like demi-romantic. People not be aware of the difference between transgender and being gender fluid. That some people are of the I am the wrong gender trapped in the wrong body variety, but then there are people who just don't feel they fit into any structure or traditional binary structure. It's very important we don't lump people all together just because they belong in the same community, and that everyone has different struggles despite being part of the same broad community. Every single letter of the LGBT community has their own unique struggles to be respected. But I don't know what I would add to that is Ahsoka. I think you've presented it very well. You've evolved each class as you've learned more about presenting, and I think you've covered a lot of bases. In broad principles, you've spoken to broad principles incredibly well, without the classes becoming inundated or dense. So it's been very enjoyable to participate. It's a bit sad I missed the first one though.
I wonder if he's taking a hack at me on that one.
No, that I wasn't available for the first one anyway. That was on me.
I'm talking about the daunting PowerPoints.
No. I think, yeah. I'll surrender the floor now.
How about you, Christiane?
Well, it does also mostly reinforce, what I've been learning over decades, in general, and always to approach as a learner, because honestly, everything has continued to shift and evolve and grow. I mean, I remember, as an academic, the fight just to get she to be an acceptable pronoun in academic discourse. The constant assumption was that he applied to every human being. And so, and I fought for a long time against the singular they, true confession. I finally have come to be comfortable with it and use it fairly fluently, along with other pronouns. And so it's a constant re-education and getting used to new patterns, new assumptions, new habits. And so to always be a learner, I think, is one of the big things that we need to embrace as we work on relationship with other people, and just growing and learning.
You let me know if you want to go to the next slide, Ahsoka.
Oh, we're just about ready.
Huh? Was that
Oh, yes.
okay?
So if you copy that link, that actually takes you to a video for a bit of reflection meditation. It's only a couple minutes long.
Okay, let me go back and grab it.
Might help everyone else if you. Oh well, no, we'll watch it through the shared screen, won't we? Cindy?
Yeah, see?
But, no, I was just going to say for if
Pop
anyone
it in
wants.
the chat.
Yeah, I was about to say if you could pop it in the chat for anyone who wants to maybe enjoys it.
Okay, well, let me get past the
Yep.
Marvel Studios skip ad thingy.
Okay.
Okay.
So we start. Yeah, start. So we
Yeah,
If
and
I got
then
a video.
we'll
Where my
share the proper screen. Share. Okay, so I will bring this all the way up. And it looks like it's a 3-minute meditation.
Yeah, so basically is a soundtrack from one of my favorite TV shows. Ali will know this show very well.
I like Legend of Korra.
So I thought a bit of meditation to just kind of reflect over everything we've learned. Again, if you've been doing the past couple of classes, but don't worry, they will all be available because this is all recorded. This is the point of where when you have learned everything else, kind of like look back, sit down, relax, and kind of reflect on what we've learned. So let's play.
All right.
Cool. Does anyone want to ask anything, or let's just generally have a chat of how we felt about the last few classes, stuff like that, and just looking towards the future. Is there anything you want to try now? Whether maybe going to a Pride event yourself, or just generally you feel like you'd be ready to ask more questions, especially towards, ask yourself these questions about the LGBT community, kind of broaden your knowledge. Is there anything anyone wants to know?
How do you feel about the power of thank you versus I'm sorry when someone misgenders you, even by accident? Do you know what I'm talking about there?
I get that a few times now because I'm non-binary. I think they both feel the same to me, but it's because, I'm really easygoing about it. I think it's weird I correct people, but I think it's like weird. And thank you. I love to be corrected. Like no one likes to be corrected. So that's a real weird one. No matter like how much you might try and be about being correct, like I think it's more, again, being I'm sorry, it sounds bad because like, well, yeah, no worries, it's fine. I think it's more just, again, it's down to sincereness. If they're being sincere, I'd be like, oh, whoops, really sorry, oh, my bad. Stuff like that, I think you can tell. If you can tell that they are just generally being a bit more sincere about it, then it's not an issue. It only becomes an issue when you can tell where it's being kind of malicious and not really any kindness into that argument. But I think if it's just genuinely like, whoops, my bad, or really sorry about that, or thanks for letting me know, then I think that's okay. I don't really mind either. At the end of the day, I think I'm quite easy. I let people off with a bit of a pass. I wind up my friends now. I wind up my friends about it, but at the end of the day, it's not hurtful to me. But again, now this is where it is a double-edged sword, because there are people in the LGBT community who can be really hurt by this if you do not respect their views, because it can be triggering for them. And at the end of the day, it's very much check. While it may seem like a hassle, check with each person kind of what's okay and what's not okay, because I get it all the time now, and I don't mind, if you just generally ask me a question, if that's okay, if that's not okay. And one of my friends, Costa, he's a really lovely bloke, and he's from Greece, so his English is kind of not completely broken English, like he speaks English, but you can tell he's got his Russian and Greek accent in his English. And he'll like ask things like, oh, is this okay? Or is that okay? I'm like, yeah, sure, no worries. And it's just like stuff like that. I think if you generally take an attitude like that, I was like, oh, is this okay? And they go, yeah, sure. That's fine. Just check with each person, but don't like just jump in with it, because that's absolutely not how you should speak to people. I think if it comes up in conversation, that is when the time is to ask the question, not just jump in with like, oh, so you're gay, so what pronoun shall I use? Can I say this? Can I say that? Like, no, don't just jump in. Like, wait till the relevant moment comes up in natural conversation, because then it just doesn't feel like you're making them feel weird, if that makes sense. Use appropriate timing and just kind of go with the flow. Think about what you're saying.
Probably similar, but is it okay if I correct my colleagues who pronoun other people, in part because, I know their preferred pronouns. Sometimes my colleagues just aren't paying attention, unfortunately. But weigh in on that idea.
I'm going to go with yes, you can correct colleagues, because my management team do it all the time to each other. I only found that out yesterday. So I went out for a pint with my manager, and he was telling me apparently they all correct each other if they're just talking about me, which I think is adorable. So I'm non-binary, so my pronouns are they and them. Apparently they all correct each other if they get it wrong, which I think is really nice. Which is fine. You can correct each other. The only thing I warn you about is, like, don't shout at them and don't be horrible to them about it, because that kind of puts, I won't say pressure on us, but it more or less kind of creates that grudging attitude towards the LGBT community, like, so demanding, like, well, not demanding, but, kind of be like, oh, actually it's they, stuff like that. But, just, again, tone of voice when you're discussing it. But, make it, what I like to do is with my, obviously, management team, I like to wind them up. So this is going to sound really bad, and I hope it doesn't come across. Again, I work in a bar, so the advice I'm about to give comes from a very hospitality background. So I wind up my colleagues and friends if they get my name wrong, and if they call me by my dead name, I wind them up and tell them they're gonna have to take a shot. No, I don't actually get them to take a shot, but it's stuff like that we make jokes about, and it's kind of that fun way of actually correcting them, without it coming across harsh. But if you have told them time and time again, and they're just doing it to the point where you feel like they're doing it on purpose, then you can complain about it. But if it's your colleagues, like, say if colleague A is talking about colleague B who's non-binary and their pronouns are they and them, and colleague A keeps saying him and he, well, you can go, well, actually that's not their pronouns. Colleague A, colleague B actually likes to pronouns are actually this, they and them. So no, you if you feel like you can step in and you can correct them, then you're more than welcome to. Call each other out, but just don't make a kind of big thing out of it. If you feel like they're not listening to you, or they're not respecting you or your colleague, that's when you should kind of go report it to someone. Does that make sense?
Yes, and actually one of the strange things about the pandemic is it's been easy to, slip into personal chat on these Zoom meetings and say, actually, it's them. So it's been pretty easy to keep it on the down low. I work in computer science, and so I'm always thinking of systemic things, especially relating to identity. What one systemic thing would you change, keeping in mind that you're in a different country than I am, that would make your life easier?
What do you mean by systemic? I just want to double check.
Well, there was one thing that fortunately our IT department was very willing to work on. But we had student rosters were always with people's dead names, and we couldn't get their preferred names to be in the official roster that was given to us as teachers. And so unfortunately, first day of class, here I am with the roster calling people by the wrong name. And so we did go to our IT department and said, really, is there no way of us fixing this in all of our student rosters so that I'm not calling someone by the wrong name and embarrassing myself and possibly harming this person? And thankfully they said, oh yeah, we could do this, this, and this. And and populate, you know, the new name everywhere. It doesn't override their quote legal name or whatever. So that's the sort of thing that I'm thinking about, is what could we do that would just make it easier to be who you are.
My school had the system where when we had for the registers, what we used to do was, back in like very much the younger years, we used to have a form of characters giving the details. I think it was every year when you like stayed on for another year, giving the details, and they had their preferred name on there, so the name that would show up on the register, and kind of teachers, so stuff like that. When you again, it's sitting that, wow, okay, this may be difficult as a teacher, I can understand. You can't just sit down with every single person. Like in my job, I can probably, if I meet someone new comes on, I can speak to them. I can, what's your name? Kind of what's your pronouns? I can speak to them. I can understand their background a lot easier. Even like our manager might tell us, like this person starting, this is their pronouns, this is, their name, stuff like that. So while it may be a big struggle in front of a class, I would say, wow, it may take a lot of time. Speaking to people can make the difference. And while that is a lot of time in your back and their back, and that person's individual's time, again, their own personal time, kind of taking the extra mile to understand who you're working with, and whether that's children in a classroom to adults in a bar, kind of knowing who your team is, who you're working with, and what you're working with. Systemically, it is just garbage. I'm not gonna lie, it is just awful. I changed by default, I changed my title to mix, so MX. But because the government in our country does not recognize that on the passports, driving license, stuff like that, I've got to have Mr. on all my legal documents, which sucks. I really don't care for it. I'd rather just be MX because I don't really care for gender rules. But that's just me personally. But, at the end of the day, if you speak to these people, if you just had, I had teachers who would speak to you, and while classes of 30 may be a hassle because there's a lot of people, kind of treat people as, treat everyone with respect and understanding, but also offer that time, offer that kind of, space, and be like, if you want to talk, I'm happy to talk anytime. We'll go into the back corridor, we'll go into somewhere private, or we'll have a talk, whatever, stuff like that. Offer them a safe and positive space to have that chat, and so on. And if you got to kind of just do it on your own back, then go for it, because that small difference can make, I've got colleagues who will always remember me because I took that 5 more minutes, or I took 10 minutes to go speak to someone in private, or I've worked with people who had depression, and I've done that with them and just listen to them chat. I'm happy to sit and just use up my break and just sit here and listen to you chat to me, because your well-being is more important than anything else in the world.
So it sounds to me, to the answer to her question is that there is not much you really see systemically that can't be bridged with just individuals talking to each other.
Pretty much. That is pretty much, yeah. I feel like that's probably the best way to word it.
The problem with systemic issues is that, generally speaking, you will only be able to confront them with, unless you have a systemic solution. From an individual perspective, all we can do is act against the consequences the systemic bias has in front of our own eyes, which is, taking that extra time with people who might otherwise be ignored by the system. It is a difficult one, undeniably, systemic issues.
What
So,
about you, Keith? Have you encountered any systemic risk issues in your field? Because I know you work with hospitals and
yeah,
whatnot.
well, generally speaking, going back to what Ahsoka was talking about, the government failing to recognize completely things such as MX and so forth. Yeah, there can be problems. You could be, and generally speaking, a lack of transgender or gender issues specialists in the country. A lot of gateway individuals don't really understand or have training in these matters. So generally speaking, a lot of what you get once people have been through a gateway, they'll be misgendered if they are transgender or gender fluid or non-binary. Generally speaking, no mention of their sexuality will come up, even though sexuality can be a huge part of someone's life. It is a huge part of most people's lives. Majority of people are sexually active, and it's part of their relationships with others, and that's a big part in happiness and mental health problems. So generally speaking, you'll hear nothing about the sexuality, be misgendered, and as said, it's just because the gateway, just people lacking the training, lacking the knowledge, and they're not equipped with it, and just lack of specialists in the country. And yeah, that's the problem. The only real solution is you start to learn to ignore the paper almost, and which is very annoying because the patient profile is supposed to be your forward scout, as it were. But I suppose if you use your military analogy, you can't rely entirely on what forward intelligence has told you anyway. So you should always reevaluate. But yeah, that's basically
That's an oxymoron.
Yeah, military intelligence. Yes. Yes, so yeah, all you really can do, as I said, when it comes to these, and report it when you see it. If you are part of a system, what you can try and do is report it, and encourage your co-workers and others in the system to report it, because the more people make noise about it, the better. But at the same time, always be trying to be solution focused. Because I said, a lot of our NHS forms and government forms don't come or will not register pronouns such as they or them. They or their, I believe, is another new one. And so all you can start doing is making sure that the forms we send out and so forth, is we just make sure there is the preferred name, preferred gender, preferred, and so forth, and that generally has helped avoid misgendering situations.
So now we've been talking a lot about transgender, the transgender community.
Yeah.
But what about in terms of people who have different sexualities? Like, or specifically, actually, let me go a little bit deeper here. Have you seen any systemic issues in regards to same-sex spouse problems?
Yes, but that again is to do with training and our understanding of relationships. The problem is relationship science is old, but also very young. But all the old, well-established things come from a very skewed source of information, which is it's all weird. It's all Western. It's all generally done with people from industrialized areas, educated people. And so the problem is that we have all this information about heteronormative relationships in the West, and this gives us a huge blind spot with same-sex relationships, and especially intercultural relationships. Yeah, so that is the big systemic, that is the systemic problem, is the science and the education isn't there, but that's because the research hasn't been done. I mean, the most fascinating research recently that comes to mind was 2016, which was about conflict resolutions between couples. And generally speaking, more often than not, we would see in heterosexual couples, generally speaking, if there was an argument, basically the resolution is that one partner would admit they were wrong. Whereas in homosexual relationships, generally speaking, there would be a far more of a compromise. A compromise would be more likely. In terms of stuff in the bedroom, which can, again, when we talk relationships, it's very important. That's intimacy. We generally know that homosexual couples achieve mutual orgasm more regularly than heterosexual couples.
Interesting.
Which is so generally speaking, yes. Generally speaking, you can sometimes assume when you're working with a homosexual couple that the sex differences or sex problems will be different, the conflicts will be different, but as I said, it's just and the problem is that you get good at working with what you face day to day. So homosexual clients and the like are still minorities in the grand scope of things. And so, it's getting the experience is very difficult unless you go out and chase that experience. It's very difficult. Or if you've not had that life experience. But going back to the basic principles of empathy is that you don't necessarily have to experience exactly the same thing a person has experienced, but you can figure out the emotion they're probably experiencing, and you can hopefully anchor the conversation in that emotion and use that to build the bridge of empathy, even if you can't exactly identify or put yourselves exactly in someone else's shoes. So it all comes down to technique and putting in the effort. And to be fair, what I'm going to say with all that is that someone being in the LGBT doesn't make them by default a more difficult client by any stretch of imagination. But they might have issues that they've experienced because of it's a bit like working with anyone from a minority. Unfortunately, in a society where you're a minority, you are more likely to be vulnerable to things such as bullying, racism, sexism, not having trust in authority figures, or feeling alienated. So there's always unique challenges in working with any client, and that's just. But yeah, the systemic bias is just lack of training and lack of research.
So I guess your answer to her question would be, we need to get more research done in the psychological field.
Well, yeah, we need to get more research done. But as I said, I think from a practical perspective is that you go back to the basic premise is if you see a problem, report the problem, but also try and suggest solutions. And generally speaking, a problem will not get solved until enough people in the position with the power to solve the problem are uncomfortable with the status quo. And that's not going to happen unless the problem is consistently brought up and solutions suggested.
Peer
Um,
pressure.
yes,
It's not always a bad thing. Just don't do drugs, people. Don't do drugs.
Well, yes. Yeah.
So keep
Right.
writing your congressperson.
Yeah. I think that's the only proactive thing you can do against systemic bias is just you have to convince enough people in the system to change the system. And so the problem is that people won't try and change something they don't care about. So for a lot of people who are heterosexual, they don't face the problems that people who are not part of conventional heteronormative society. Well, just look at society and the problem women still face. You would think 50% of the world, in terms of population, you would think the world would be quite well balanced between problems for each sex. No, it's still a man's world. How many women's hygiene products in the Western world is still classed and taxed as luxury items?
Although you're not even going to be started on that.
Yeah.
I have to write a whole paper on feminism to educate myself, and it's just absolutely mental. Even then, like tech industry, of how much sexism is still quite a big issue.
Yeah, and that's what I mean is that you just have to work to make it a problem for everyone who then feels the need to solve it. That's the only way to confront systemic bias. Anyway, it is time. I was off to bed actually. My bedtime alarm has just binged. So if you don't mind, I'm going to disappear, everyone. Again, very enlightening, very interesting evening, and I'll leave you all to it.
May the force be with you, Keith.
And also with you. Stay safe, everyone.
So I'm tapped out on anything to comment on.
Ditto.
So
Look
why don't
forward
you
to the center of the three.
So let's go ahead and you can wrap this up, Ahsoka, if you have any additional comments.
No, just the last slide. So I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who's joined in these classes. And if you do watch them, again, thank you very much for watching them. This has been a really big step in my journey as a Jedi. I've definitely learned a lot throughout the years, especially from my mentors. So big thank you to them. They know who they are. And just everyone who's been with me on this path since becoming a Jedi a couple of years ago. And I really hope that this class is a big step forward of responsibilities. Hopefully, I'm understanding, leadership, responsibility, stuff like that a bit more, have a better understanding instead of just trying to charge and do what's best. But instead of taking a back view, understanding the bigger world and society that we live in more. And that's kind of one of the things I hope for this year. But just overall, I'm really thankful for the opportunity to teach a subject, especially one that's related to the Jedi community, because the Jedi community has played such a big role in my life. And that's all I've got to say.
Well, thank you for having us.